Let's make a simple box. Hi everybody and welcome back to Mixed Woodwork Wonders. Now when you start out in woodwork, one of the first things you'll probably have a go at making is a simple wooden box. So in this video I'm going to show you the basics of making a simple wooden box. So the box we're going to make is going to be made out of some pine. Here I've got some offcuts that we're going to trim up and use for the sides of the box. And then the top and the bottom of the box, we're going to use some of this sheet ply. This is 5.5mm ply. And now we're going to keep this box very simple. Of course, you can go a lot more involved when you get experience built up. But to keep it nice and simple, we're going to be using butt joints, pinned through with a nail gun. Now, if you haven't got a nail gun, I've got a nail gun in the workshop. If you haven't got one, you can just use panel pins and an hammer. It'll do exactly the same, and the procedure for making this box is going to be exactly the same. I've got a nice pair of hinges, some screws for the hinges. We've got some wood glue, PVA in this case. I think it's time to get cracking. So the first thing is we need to cut our sides, so that'll be our front, our back and both ends to our preferred size. Now you can do these any size you want. Of course, I'm just using these offcuts for this example, so size is not critical. But of course you will calculate what size you want your box. So for people that don't know what a butt joint is, basically it is just two pieces of timber that butt up together like that. Now this is probably the simplest joint you'll find in woodwork. The next from that you could do a haunch joint where you remove some of that timber to let the other piece of timber sit in slightly. But as I say, I want to keep it simple for you beginners out there so you can have a go at this. You're not too overwhelmed with how complicated it is. Now we're going to fix our front and back on the ends like that. So the front and back will be the length of the box, and the ends which fit inside there will be the width of the box less two thicknesses of this timber. As I say, it doesn't really matter. Size isn't critical with this example, but if size is important to you, of course, then you would knock two thicknesses of that timber off. So let's take all this over to the miter saw and trim them to length. So as I say, size isn't critical for me with this example. So I'm just going to look at these two pieces here and take the shortest one, which is that one. It's got a square edge on one side. The other side is a bit of a rough edge. Now, always check this when you're making anything out of timber. Always check the cuts on your timber or square, because sometimes you'll measure from that end, you'll cut your timber to length, and then you'll look at it and think, it's not square, it's just a rough cut that somebody's done. So what I like to do is square both ends up. So I'm going to take the shortest piece first and I'm just going to square these ends up. Okay, so I've squared those ends up. Now I know both of those ends are square, so I can get my other piece and I'm going to take the measurements off this piece onto this piece. But again, I'm going to put a square edge on this piece first to make sure it's square. Okay, so that's a square edge. Now I know that's square. Now I can mark the piece off this other piece. So I'm just going to mark that like that. As I say, if you haven't got power tools, if you're doing this totally by hand, that's perfectly fine. I'm just showing you what tools I've got. I'm keeping the tools pretty basic. I'm not going over to the radial arm, so most people have got a miter saw if they want to take up woodwork. If you haven't, it doesn't matter. Just use a tenon saw or something like that and just do exactly the same but using hand saws. So that's our front and back cut to length. So we'll just put those over the bench. Now I'm going to do exactly the same with the ends. As I say, size isn't critical for me. It doesn't matter what size the box ends up. If it did, of course, then you would knock the front and the back thickness of the timber off when you cut these to length so that the outside edge of the box is the right dimensions. But as I say, it doesn't matter to me. So again, I'm just going to take the shortest one. I'm going to put a square on both ends, and then I'm going to square one side up on the other piece, and then take that measurement off that one so that both pieces are exactly the same length. Okay, that's all cut. Now over to the bench. Okay, so we've got his end pieces like that, both the same length, the short ones, and then we've got his front and back, which are the longer pieces. Again, both exactly the same length. We know all the ends are nice and square because we've trimmed them all. We've got no raw ends on the timber. As I say, be careful when you are using timber. Never rely on the end being square because you'll probably find most cases it isn't. So always trim your ends off. Get them nice and square before you take your measurement. So what we're going to do now, as I say, you're going to use a simple butt joint for you. We're going to put that on there, a little bit of PVA on, and then we're going to just pin through there. I'm using the 18 gauge nail gun, which is this one here. This is a Senko 18 gauge nail gun, and I've got a little portable compressor I'm using. If you haven't got a nail gun, it doesn't matter whether you haven't got, you can get an electric one. If you haven't got one though, and you want to do it by hand, it's not a problem. Just use a normal little pin hammer or a claw hammer and some panel pins and you'll be fine. Now the easiest way I find to do this is, we're going to be working on this joint here, but I get the other piece and I put that on the bench as well, because then when I put my piece on top to fasten it, that will support that end. So rather than trying to hold it and wobbling all over the place, it'll just give you a little bit of support on that end. So we're going to put a bit of PVA on here first. Okay, so you don't want too much PVA, don't go silly with it, but you want enough that it's going to do its job. And you just position that on there. When you bring these joints together, just rub them gently like that, and it'll just spread the glue out, and it'll stop the piece moving when you start to nail it. Then I'm going to put 3 pins in here. Okay, so that's 3 pins in, made it nice and rigid. Now I'm going to turn it round and I'm going to bring my other piece to the edge here. I need to put some glue on here, so I'll do that first. Again, I'm just going to rub that slightly just to spread the glue around and just stop it moving. If you don't do that, you will find if you just bring 2 joints together with glue on, especially PVA, and you clamp them, you'll find that they'll move like that. So then you'll end up with a step. They won't be flush where you need them. But if you just rub them together like that, it spreads the glue out and you'll feel the friction get more and more. So eventually it'll just become fixed and it'll not slide. It's a good thing to remember, that is, because if you don't, when you cramp the joints, or like I'm doing this now, if I put my weight on there, it'll have a tendency to slide and move while I'm trying to fix it. So again, 3 nails. That's it. So we've got that shape now. Now we can put glue on both of these ends, because we're going to fix this other piece on top of this. And again, we're just going to put the other piece on. Again, rub it slightly. You can rub it on both ends so you can feel it nice, starting to grab. 3 nails again. And over to the final side. Exactly the same again. Okay, so that's our cube made there. You see that? I'm going to check this at this point. Just make sure we are square. We will square it when we fasten our top and bottom on. But just as long as we're not a million miles out, that's fine. Okay, so that's our square done. Just move that out of the way for the time being. Now, as I said, the top and bottom we're going to do out this 5.5mm plywood sheet. So we need to cut, of course, the top and the bottom. Now, when you get to this point, there's a couple of different ways to do this. You can sort of cut your plywood near enough to the exact size you want, and then just sand it back with a sander to get it nice and flush. Or if you've got one, you could use something like a palm router. You could make your plywood sheet a little bit oversized and then use a flush cutter, which is like a cutter with a roller bearing on, and you can just go around and trim it off to the exact size. Then it'll finish totally flush. But that's only if you've got something like a little palm router or a normal handheld router and a flush cutting bit. In this example, I'm just going to cut this near enough exact, and then we're just going to finish it off with the sander. I just want to keep it really simple for you beginners out there, just so you can have a go, you can make something, and it'll make you feel good. So I'm positioning this. I know I've checked this plywood, and this corner is square. Again, always check. So I'm getting my box right into this corner like that, and then I'm just going to mark these other two sides here. Okay, like that. So I know I need two pieces at that. So I'm going to cut one and then I'm going to mark the other one off that one. Now I'm going to cut these again on the miter saw. If you haven't got a miter saw, as I say, just cut them by hand using something like a tenon saw you can use, or you can use a panel saw, whichever you prefer. You can even use an hand tool like a jigsaw, like a power hand tool. But as I say, I've got the miter saw, so I'm going to use the miter saw. So over to the miter saw. Okay, so that's one cut. Now I'm going to mark the other one off, this one, and cut start again. Always check your plywood. I've just noticed on this one there is an actual fault, if you can see it there in the plywood. It doesn't really matter for this example, but just to prove a point, I'm going to cut it out of this corner so I avoid that bad area there. So it is something, when using sheet materials, especially plywoods, always check your plywood before you cut it, because sometimes you'll cut a piece and then you'll realise it's got a bad bit on it, and if you'd cut it from the other side, you could have avoided that bad bit. So always check your sheet materials. They do get damaged in transit, and very often I've cut a piece for a job and then realised there's a scratch or a hole in it, and then you can't use it. Now I'm pushing this up to the fence so it keeps that edge nice and flush. So I know that that piece and that piece are both level. I can feel this side, so I know they're level, so that I can just mark around this one. And we'll just trim this one. And the other way. Okay, so that's our two pieces cut. Now it's time to fasten the top and bottom on our box. So we've got our framework made up. We've got our two plywood pieces there cut. So now it's time to fasten these on here. Now you're probably thinking at this point, Mick, if you fasten that top and that bottom on, there's no opening. But I'm going to show you a little trick. But before I show you that, we need to fasten these on. So again, we're going to get a bit of PVA. We're going to put this around the perimeter of our box. You don't need a lot of glue on this. And we put our ply on. Again, we're going to rub it slightly. We've got about 1/2 mil overhang here all the way around, which is perfect, because we're going to sand that back with a sander in this case. As I say, if you hadn't got a palm router or a router with a flush cutter, you could use that, but I don't want to make it too complicated, so I'm just going to fasten it on, and then I'm going to sand it back with this palm sander. Then we're going to flip it over and then glue again on this side. And then same again, fasten this piece of plywood on this side. Okay, so that's our plywood fastened on, top and bottom. Now we need to just clean these edges up and make them nice and smooth. I'm going to use a little palm sander, a little random orbital sander for that. And I'm going to sand all these off. So I'm going to speed this up because it's going to take me a few minutes. So I'll get on with it. I'm going to clean the top and bottom edges up, make it nice and smooth all over, and then we'll show you how to make this cube into a box. Okay, so that's our box now sanded. So we've got a totally sealed box, as you can see. Now we need to turn this into an opening box. Now, how are we going to do that? So a lot of people, when they're making boxes, they'll make a top and a bottom, and then they'll try and match the two up. Now, the easiest way and the best way to do this is to make it a sealed box like this, and then cut round the perimeter of the box to form a top and a bottom. So first of all, we've got to decide how big we want our top and our bottom. Do we want it equal parts? Do we want a thinner top and a thicker bottom, or whatever? So I'm going to do this with a slightly smaller top than bottom. Hence the reason I put 3 pins in, because I've put a pin in the middle so that I can make me cut in between pin 1 and 2, so that I'm not going to hit any pins when I'm cutting around this. Now, there's a few different ways to cut round this perimeter. If you've got a table saw, some people do it on a table saw like that. They'll go round, they'll set the blade quite low, and then they'll just go round like that. That's all right. It can be a little bit dangerous, so I don't recommend that way unless you're really competent at doing it, because it can be a little bit dangerous if you don't watch what you're doing. Another way is to use a jigsaw and just cut round the perimeter of the box, which is the way I'm going to use. If you haven't got a jigsaw and you're just starting out, then just get yourself something like that, like a panel saw, and you can just work your way around the box like that with a panel saw. But as I say, I've got a jigsaw, so I'm going to mark this round now, right around the perimeter of the box, and then I'm going to get the jigsaw and I'm just going to cut right round the perimeter of the box to form our top and our bottom. But first of all, I need to mark. So I'm just going to use this ruler here I've got with a little stop on. You see that? It's got a little stop on. This is dead handy. What I'd like to do, I just set it at whatever I want, like that. And then I use the hole there. There's a little hole in it. You can see that? And I put my pencil in that hole and keep the pencil over to one side of the hole. And then I just basically scribe across the box like that. And that gives me my line like that, where I've got cut to. So now I need to mark this on all 4 sides. Okay, so that's marked on all 4 sides, as you can see, all the way around the box. So now it's time to get cutting. As I say, I'm going to use the jigsaw. If you haven't got a jigsaw, just use a normal saw and just take your time and cut round the perimeter of the box. And there we have it. We've now formed our opening box. So now we've cut our box like that. I just want to clean this edge up now, this meeting edge. I don't want to create too much of a gap there. I could go around if I wanted to put a 45 or a radius on the meeting edges, so it creates like a shadow gap round. But I'm just going to take this edge off, just take the arris off with a bit of sandpaper. So I've got some 100 grit here, 100 grit sandpaper, and I'm just going to take the edge off here. Don't need to use the power sander for this. I can just take the edges off like this. All 4 sides, same on the inside. Spend as long as you need to spend on this to get the finish you need. One side. So, all sanded. Now we're ready to fix some hinges. As I said, I'm going to use these little butt hinges. I'm just going to face fix these. Now you could chop them in, you could recess them in. But as I say, I'm keeping this simple for your beginner woodworkers. So I'm just going to lay them flat on the surface like that. But a good tip at this point is when I'm fixing these hinges on, I'm going to get a couple of speed clamps like these, and I'm just going to hold the lid and the base together. So I'm just going to put it across the tool like that. Make sure the box is level where we need it to be. And then I'm just going to nip that up. Same on this side. I'm going to put one on this side as well, like that. So basically, the box is being held together then in the right position. And that's exactly the right position. And then we can just lay our hinges on the face like that. I can just measure from this side of the box and that side of the box the same distance. And we're just going to screw those on there with some 3x20 posi drive screws. So we're going to measure our distance in. In this case, I'm going to go in 40 millimeters or 4 centimeters from each side. And then we're just going to put these hinges across our joint. If you can see that, let me hold this up to the camera so you can see that better. So as you can see, across the cut in the joint, we're going to just lay those flat like that. So there's half on the lid and half on the base. We're just going to take our little 3x20 screws and simply screw those like that. Get one screw in the top and then one screw in the bottom to start with. You'll find it easier that way rather than trying to put two in the top and two in the bottom. That's 1 inch, and then we take the other inch. Exactly the same again. Half on the lid, half on the base. Okay, so that's both hinges screwed on, 4 screws in each. Now we can take our clamps off. And that, folks, is our finished box. As you can see, hinges lovely fitted, top, bottom, edges all line up perfectly. And that's because we did that cutting trick earlier. And that's why it's flipping perfect. So that's your basic box. If you've enjoyed watching that video and you want to see more, make sure you hit the subscribe button, and that helps us grow the channel. Also, hit that like button, hit that share button, and I'll see you lot on the next one.